Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something really fundamental, aren't we? This continuous flow of decisions, the choices that shape our lives.
Exactly. From those really big crossroads moments down to, well, just everyday selections, even deciding not to act is a choice.
Right. And these choices, they carve out our paths. We've gathered some fascinating material here, philosophy, psychology, even AI, to really dig into it.
Yeah, our goal is to give you a clear sense of why and how we make these life-shaping decisions. We want to explore, the nature of choice itself, the forces acting on us.
How our ability to choose even develops.
Precisely. And the really intriguing role AI might play. Our sources offer some rich perspectives, so yeah, let's jump in.
Okay, so maybe let's kick things off with that foundational debate, the big one. Free will versus determinism.
Yes, classics.
Philosophers have argued for ages, haven't they? About whether we truly control our actions, that's free will, where we're active, responsible agents.
Right. Versus the idea of determinism, where maybe our behavior is just caused by internal, external forces, meaning maybe true freedom is, well, an illusion.
So where do the main arguments fall?
Well, you have incompatibilism first. This says free will and determinism just can't coexist. They're mutually exclusive.
Okay.
And under that umbrella, you get two main branches. First, there's hard determinism.
Hard determinism, forget it.
This view says simply determinism is true. So, free will, that's just a feeling, an illusion. All those choices you think you're making are actually predetermined outcomes, which naturally raises some big questions about accountability. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it was always going to happen, can you really be held responsible? Does blame or praise even make sense?
Exactly the issue. Then the other side of incompatibilism is libertarianism.
Okay.
These thinkers say, no, free will is real, so determinism must be false. We are the ultimate originators of our actions.
So that fits much better with our gut feeling of being in control and being morally responsible for what we do.
It certainly aligns with that intuition. And then there's a third major view, compatibilism, sometimes called soft determinism.
Soft determinism.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, compatibilists argue that determinism and free will can actually coexist. It's a different take on freedom.
How so?
Freedom, in this view, means acting according to your own desires, your beliefs, without somebody forcing you from the outside, even if those desires themselves have, underlying causes.
Okay. So even if my wanting coffee is, like, biologically driven,
Yeah.
if I choose to get up and make it without someone making me, that's still a free act.
That's the core idea for many compatibilists, yes.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So how do they handle responsibility then?
Well, they often argue that responsibility holds up as long as your actions come from your internal states, your character, your desires, even if those states have a causal history. So yeah, this whole philosophical discussion really probes those deep questions you might have about your own agency. When are you accountable? How much control do you really have over your life's direction?
It's fundamental stuff.
Okay.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From the philosophical why to maybe the psychological how do we actually make decisions? It feels like this key brain function, right?
Right.
Evaluating things, predicting.
Absolutely. It's a core cognitive function, evaluating options, predicting outcomes, selecting a path. But like you hinted, it's rarely purely logical.
Right, there's always emotion mixed in, isn't there?
Definitely. It's often a blend of rational thought and, emotional responses. A typical process might look something like first recognizing you need to choose.
Okay.
Then gathering info, weighing the alternatives, making the choice, acting on it, and then, importantly, reflecting on how it went.
But that sounds quite neat. Real life feels messier.
It is, because that seemingly straightforward process gets constantly nudged and sometimes derailed by cognitive biases.
Biases. Those mental shortcuts that sometimes lead us down the wrong path. We've all been there, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. They're systematic patterns of deviation from rational judgment, like mental shortcuts that often work, but sometimes cause predictable errors.
Can you give us some examples? How do these biases mess with our big life choices?
Sure. Take confirmation bias. That's our tendency to hunt for and give more weight to information that confirms what we already believe.
Right. So if I think a certain investment is good, I'll mostly read the positive news about it.
Exactly. You might unconsciously ignore the warning signs. Then there's the anchoring effect. We rely too heavily on the first piece of information we get.
Like in a negotiation, that first salary offer or asking price.
Precisely. That first number really anchors your perception of what's reasonable, even if it's arbitrary.
Okay, that makes sense.
What else? The availability heuristic is a big one. We judge likelihood based on how easily examples spring to mind.
So if I see lots of news reports about plane crashes.
You might overestimate the actual risk of flying, even though statistically it's very safe, because those vivid examples are readily available in your memory. And let's not forget overconfidence bias. We often overestimate our own abilities or how likely good things are to happen.
Leading to maybe risky business ventures or financial decisions.
It certainly can. These biases are like these hidden currents, subtly steering our decisions, sometimes towards irrational outcomes across all sorts of life domains.
Yeah, hidden influences. And you mentioned emotions earlier. How deeply do they affect our choices?
Oh, profoundly. Emotions are tightly woven into decision-making. They shape how we perceive risk. They influence our thought processes. They drive our behavior.
Even when we think we're being totally rational.
Especially then, sometimes. There's almost always an emotional undercurrent. Think about it. Feeling anxious might make you overly cautious, maybe missing a good opportunity.
Yeah.
But feeling really optimistic or excited might lead you to underestimate potential risks. It's a constant interplay.
Like our gut feelings are always talking to our logical brain, sometimes arguing.
You could put it that way. And this ties into prospect theory. Remember Kahneman and Tversky?
Vaguely, yeah. About gains and losses.
Exactly. Their key insight was that we feel the pain of a loss much more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Loss aversion.
Ah, right. So losing 100 pounds feels worse than finding 100 pounds feels good.
Precisely. So our decisions aren't based on absolute outcomes, but on perceived gains or losses relative to some reference point, like our current situation.
Okay.
And crucially, how a choice is framed presented can drastically change our decision, even if the objective facts are identical.
Like the doctor saying 90% survival rate versus 10% mortality rate.
Perfect example. Same statistic, but the framing makes one sound much better. It taps into that loss aversion.
That makes total sense, especially for things like health decisions or finances. Avoiding that feeling of loss is a huge motivator.
A very powerful one. And all this really highlights the idea of bounded rationality.
Bounded rationality.
Yeah, the idea that we're not perfectly rational calculators. Our thinking is limited, bounded by our cognitive capacity, those biases we talked about, and our emotions.
So that helps explain why people sometimes make choices that seem, well, illogical or even counterproductive from an outside perspective.
It provides a framework for understanding that, yes, it's not always about being irrational, but about making decisions within these very real human constraints.
This is really clarifying. Now, another huge piece of this puzzle must be our sense of right and wrong, our morality. How does that develop and shape our choices?
Absolutely crucial. Our moral compass, how it guides our decisions, evolves quite dramatically as we grow. Piaget's early work suggested a shift,
A shift?
from focusing mainly on the consequences, like getting caught, to understanding intentions and mutual agreements. What's fair?
So little kids worry about punishment, but older kids start thinking, did they mean to do it? And is this fair to everyone?
Basically, yes. And then Kohlberg built on that with his famous stage theory of moral development.
Yeah.
6 stages, 3 levels.
Okay, break that down a bit.
Sure. It starts with pre-conventional morality. That's all about self-interest, avoid punishment, get rewards. Very external.
Like a toddler.
Often, yes. Then comes conventional morality. Here, the focus shifts to social norms, maintaining order, wanting approval, following the rules because they're the rules.
That sounds like maybe adolescence and much of adulthood for many, conforming to society's expectations.
That's generally the idea, yeah. Finally, there's the post-conventional level. This is where people start thinking more abstractly about universal ethical principles: justice, rights, fairness.
Even if those principles clash with the law or social norms.
Potentially, yes. It's about developing an internal moral code based on these higher principles.
So it's like a journey from what's in it for me to what does everyone else expect, and finally to what's fundamentally right based on my values.
That's a good way to summarize the progression. And this evolving moral reasoning deeply shapes the ethical dimension of our choices throughout life. We move from external pressures to internal considerations of intent and impact.
And I imagine culture throws another layer onto this, right? What's considered right varies so much.
Hugely. Cultural norms, societal values, they strongly influence moral decisions. Think about individualistic cultures often prioritizing personal autonomy.
Like in the US or Western Europe.
Often, yes. Versus collectivistic cultures, where group harmony and the community's needs might take precedence.
like in many Asian or Latin American cultures.
Generally speaking, these cultural frameworks define what choices are seen as acceptable, even laudable, or conversely, unacceptable within that society.
So a choice could be perfectly normal in one place and taboo in another. You also mentioned understanding consequences developing. How critical is that for moral choices?
Oh, it's essential. Anticipating outcomes is key for making responsible, ethical decisions, and this ability grows over time.
How early does it start?
Very young kids grasp immediate consequences. Drop a toy, it falls. But understanding short-term versus long-term implications, that takes time. By around 2.5, they connect actions to immediate results. By 3, they're usually making simple choices, and getting that breaking rules leads to consequences. As this understanding deepens through childhood and adolescence, it profoundly shapes their ethical decision-making.
So as we get older, our decision-making isn't static, is it? It keeps changing.
Definitely keeps changing. It's not just about getting better or worse either, it's more nuanced. There are positive and negative shifts with age.
Like what, for instance?
Well, research suggests older adults might tend to simplify how they make decisions sometimes. Maybe they delegate more or rely on simpler strategies.
Okay.
They also often seem to prioritize emotional well-being more, especially focusing on positive emotions, and perhaps show less appetite for risk-taking compared to younger folks.
That's some stereotypes, I guess. What about younger people?
Younger individuals might initially focus more intensely on the sort of literal details of the information presented.
Interesting. And those biases we discussed, do they hit different age groups differently?
It's complex. Susceptibility to framing effects, for example, how choices are presented, seems more linked to cognitive abilities, things like working memory, rather than just age itself.
Ah, so it's not just about the number of birthdays.
Not solely, no. And yet, different biases can show up differently or maybe to different degrees across the lifespan.
What about those really big long-term life decisions? Saving for retirement, career paths, health choices. What psychological factors are at play there?
Well, one factor is decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue, like getting tired of choosing.
Exactly. After making a whole string of choices, our mental energy gets depleted. This can lead to poorer quality decisions later on, maybe opting for the easiest option rather than the best one.
I think I felt that after a long day of meetings.
We all have, and our past experiences, especially highly memorable or emotional ones, can cast a long shadow, influencing our long-term decision patterns.
Makes sense.
Then there's the evolutionary angle. Some argue we might have a built-in bias towards immediate gratification over long-term benefits.
The classic marshmallow test idea, wanting the treat now.
Sort of, yeah. That can make choices requiring patience, saving money, sticking to a diet particularly challenging. Stress is another factor. High stress can push us towards habitual, automatic responses instead of thoughtful, goal-directed planning.
Wow, so the sheer volume of choices we face can literally wear us down. It makes me wonder, when do these really significant human lifetime choices start taking shape?
Yeah.
It's not like babies are weighing career options.
No, not quite. Basic choices emerge very early, of course, but the complexity, the sophistication needed for those big life decisions, that develops gradually.
As our brains mature, we learn from experience.
Exactly. Cognitive development, life experience, shifting priorities as we age, they all play a role. This evolution is crucial for things like risk assessment, moral reasoning, those really weighty ethical choices.
And as you said, that decision fatigue can impact subsequent choices, which underlines how important it is to have good strategies for making decisions over the long haul.
Absolutely. And that tension between wanting short-term rewards versus long-term goals, that really plays out in areas like health and finances, doesn't it? Making consistent, healthy choices or saving diligently can be tough because the immediate reward isn't always obvious.
It's all incredibly interconnected and complex. And now there's a new player entering the field, artificial intelligence. How is AI starting to impact our understanding of these choices and maybe even how we make them?
Yeah, this is where things get really fascinating and maybe a bit futuristic. AI presents some truly transformative opportunities, but also challenges.
How so? In what ways?
Well, AI is already being used in psychology and decision science for things like diagnostics, suggesting therapies, analyzing huge amounts of research data.
So it can spot patterns we might miss.
Precisely. AI can process vast data sets and identify subtle, complex patterns in behavior and decision-making that will be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for humans to see. So we're seeing AI helping mental health professionals, AI chatbots providing basic support, even AI being used to build and test theories about how human decision-making actually works.
It's like getting a superpowered lens to look at our own minds. You mentioned biases earlier. That seems like a key area where AI could potentially help.
A huge potential area, yes. AI could be used to identify and perhaps even help mitigate the impact of those cognitive biases we discussed.
How would that work?
Through things like analyzing language patterns, decision logs, AI might be able to detect signs of common biases. Imagine an AI noticing you consistently overweighting initial information anchoring or only seeking out confirming evidence.
Wow.
AI systems can bring a level of objectivity and consistency. They don't have gut feelings in the human sense. They can analyze data systematically. Of course, the AI itself needs to be designed carefully to avoid its own biases.
Critical point. The AI is only as unbiased as the data it's trained on.
Exactly. That's a major ethical consideration we need to circle back to. But the potential is there. We could train AI to spot bias patterns and, crucially, develop explainable AI systems.
Explainable AI, meaning we understand why the AI flagged something as biased.
Yes. It can't just be a black box. We need transparency to trust its insights and interventions.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the emotional side? Can AI engage with our feelings around decisions?
That's the domain of emotion AI, or affective computing. It's developing rapidly. AI systems are getting better at recognizing human emotions by analyzing facial expressions, voice tone, even physiological signals like heart rate.
Seriously?
Yes, the potential applications are quite something. Imagine AI-driven simulations to help people practice emotional intelligence skills, or decision support tools that can gently account for your current emotional state to maybe help prevent impulsive, emotionally charged choices.
That sounds almost like science fiction, like having an emotionally aware co-pilot for your decisions.
It's closer than you might think, though still early days. Looking ahead, AI could offer personalized feedback on your decision-making style, flag potential biases in real time, maybe even offer techniques for emotional regulation when you're facing a tough choice.
But you mentioned ethical considerations earlier. This sounds powerful, but also potentially risky.
Absolutely. We have to tread carefully. There are significant ethical concerns. Algorithmic discrimination is a big one. If the AI is trained on biased data, it can perpetuate or even amplify those biases.
So it could discriminate against certain groups without intending to?
Precisely. Then there's transparency and accountability. If an AI system influences a major life decision, who's responsible if things go wrong? The user, the developer.
Tricky.
And privacy is huge, especially with emotion AI. Collecting and analyzing sensitive emotional data raises serious privacy questions. Plus, the potential for manipulation exists if these tools aren't used ethically.
Right. Influencing people's choices based on their emotional state feels like a very delicate area. And what about just human autonomy? Does relying too much on AI erode our own ability to choose?
That's perhaps the deepest question. We need to ensure these tools support human decision-making, not replace it. The goal should be augmentation, not abdication of our own judgment and values. It requires a really thoughtful, human-centered approach.
This has been incredibly insightful. So just to try and wrap this up, these human lifetime choices, they're shaped by this amazing complex mix of things. Philosophy, our own psychology biases, emotions, our developing moral sense, culture, age.
And now, increasingly, the potential influence of artificial intelligence.
Right. And these decisions don't just shape our own lives, but collectively, they shape society. It's this constantly evolving process.
Exactly. And AI brings both this incredible potential for deeper self-understanding, for maybe making better or less biased choices, for supporting well-being, but also these really significant challenges and ethical questions we just touched on.
It feels like we're right at the cusp of understanding how AI will weave into this fundamental human experience of making choices.
We really are.
Oh.
Which leads nicely into a final thought, perhaps, for you listening.
Okay.
As you go about making your own choices, day to day, big and small, think about this. How do you see the balance? How might you leverage the potential insights AI could offer while fiercely protecting your own agency, your values, your essential humanness in making decisions? Consider the influences we talked about, those mental shortcuts, your emotional responses, your cultural background, your stage of life. How aware are you of them? And how might becoming more aware, maybe even with some future AI assistance, lead you to make different choices moving forward? It's certainly something worth reflecting on.
This is DigitView.